are you sure that they know what you're talking about? Think about how many times, Raj, everyone's in a meeting and you're saying, here's the objective, and everyone's shaking their head, and then they leave the meeting and they have no idea,
They're
right?
unclear. Yeah.
Right? So if you say, okay, just to help make sure that I communicated effectively, what did you just hear? You will not hear what you said.
Sometimes setting objectives for your teams can cause a little bit of confusion. And then as a leader, an executive, you don't always get the results that you're hoping for. So in this podcast, we're going to talk about specific things that leaders can do to make sure that their objectives are very clear so that their teams deliver the results that they're hoping for. Joining me today is Dr. Jeff Kaplan. He is the CEO of Leading with Heart. Jeff, welcome to today's podcast.
Thanks, Raj. Good to be here.
Let's start talking about why this happens. I mean, it's a pretty common phenomenon. And maybe we can start talking about it in the context of defining goals. So could you break down the components of a well-defined objective?
Yeah, let's start with it's the leader's fault.
It's the leader's fault. Yes.
Just, so a lot of times there's something to think about triangle, right? So this is from like Lean Six Sigma, right? So GPRI, right? So goals, processes, roles, responsibilities, and interpersonal. So bottom line is a lot of times when there's infighting, the reality is like we were never clear on what the goals are and we weren't aligned. Right. So first of all, it starts with being very clear and specific. Right. So when I look at I look at things as like 7 barriers to underperformance, lack of clear goals is one of them. Is first of all, have you communicated? Let me put it to you this way. Are you sure that they know what you're talking about? Think about how many times, Raj, everyone's in a meeting and you're saying, here's the objective, and everyone's shaking their head, and then they leave the meeting and they have no idea.
They're
right?
unclear. Yeah.
Right. So if you say, okay, just to help make sure that I communicated effectively, what did you just hear? You will not hear what you said.
Yeah, that's one of the best techniques is just have them reflect back their understanding of what they heard. Very common technique that's very effective also. So if the executive, a leader, CEO, CXO, manager, VP is trying to create this set of objectives so they can get deliverables, what are the signs that people are not fully grasping? Outside of just asking them, what are the signs?
Right. Well, first, just to finish answering your other question, right? So, first of all, is it clear? Is it measurable? Is it timed? Right? Is it realistic? Are they going to have the right resources in order to get it done? Have you
Smart
clarified what
goals.
the parameters are on both sides of it? Have you empowered them? Are you getting in the middle of it? Or are you truly providing the right level of support? Did you connect it to the higher vision and the priorities for the year? Is it hopefully not one of 500 priorities, right? But a clearly defined small set of priorities connected to an agenda, right? So let's just assume all that goes all swimmingly. Yay, we got all that lined up. Then to your point, right? So people are not delivering on time. People are not delivering what you expected. People are stepping over each other, right? Which is also about roles and responsibilities, right? And so if those things are happening, what I would say is rather than what generally tends to happen is we start kind of attacking the people, right? And, Bob really doesn't get it kind of thing. What I would say is can you just put a pause, go back, ask everybody what they think the goals and metrics are, and just do a reality check with yourself. Was I clear about what the objective was, when it needed to be done, and, everything I just talked about.
How often should you be communicating with your teams to make sure that they are on track?
Well, it depends on the project and the context, but one of the things that I love for projects that involved multiple stakeholders and are very dynamic, changing every day, is it's called Scrum, SCRUM. And it's like, so just standing up for, 50, and if it's in person, everyone's like standing, right? It's 15 minutes, right? 15 minutes. So different varieties of this, but what are you trying to accomplish today? What do you need from us? Like, where are you stuck? Right. And so that's a daily 15-minute thing where you're not doing deep dives. I caution between having on the other side way too many meetings right? That aren't necessary. So, what I would say there, Raj, is if people are working on a complicated project, have little check-ins, right? So, okay, get this far and then come back to me. So I give you a kind of a response to it, so that people don't go way too down the line and realize they were heading in the wrong direction.
There's a technique that one of my mentors has taught me, and it's called shorten the interval of control. So if you're not getting the results you want, and let's say you have a weekly meeting, in that case, break it down into maybe meeting with that person 1 or 2 times prior to the weekly meeting, just to make sure that they're on track. And if you need to, have that daily huddle with them, that stand-up meeting, just to make sure that there are no obstacles in the way. And you can do a quick check-in, which is, hey, what were the 5 things that you worked on yesterday? What are the 5 things that you plan to work on today? And sometimes something as simple as that, it's a very short conversation, but that really helps keep everybody aligned to make sure that they're on track with the deliverables.
Yeah, I find, when I do that, it's like, where are you at? What do you need from me? And what do I need to know?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's, and I agree. So, generally there's like hands-on managers and hands-off managers. And when I hear about people who aren't doing that, and then they complain that people aren't delivering, is that there are some people, particularly if they lack competence or confidence, they need a lot more touch points, right? And so if somebody's underperforming, you might want to just check in, to your point, like every day. Just let's 5 minutes, let's just check in, where you're at, what do you need, what do I need to know? But also um, giving them metrics, like, okay, and working with them, like, say, okay, so by the end of the week, where do you think you'll be, or where should we be, and then using that as a check-in point.
One of the obstacles that I oftentimes see in terms of getting clarity is that a leader will read something in a magazine and they will see another company that they'd like to be like and say, we need to be doing that, whatever they're doing. And they go to their team and they say, read this article, we need to be doing that. And now all the priorities that were set prior to this, everybody's getting confused now. What are we actually supposed to be doing? And this we need to be doing that statement from the leader causes the confusion. And so what oftentimes I will recommend teams do is when they're faced with that type of situation, respond back with this statement. What about this did you really like? And that forces the leader to add clarity, because oftentimes, as you pointed out, it's the fault of the leader for not being as clear. And I've been in so many meetings where a leader absolutely thinks they're being clear, and you walk back and you're like, this is a complete mumbo jumbo mess. It's like they got something in their head and I don't know what they're talking about. So, yeah.
Yeah, look, I do it with my team. Like, I guarantee anybody's listening to this, just try it for a week. And after you give a directive, ask them, or have had a conversation, everybody thinks you're on the same page. Ask them what they heard. And you can just say, look, sometimes I don't communicate. Blame it on yourself. I don't communicate clear. So it doesn't sound like you're in second grade. I communicate clearly. Like, just can you feedback what you heard? And I guarantee, like, easily 8 times out of 10, well, oh, whoops, no, yeah, not quite that. So we make assumptions, and we say just because we said it means that they heard it and understood it. Don't make that assumption.
And I think one of the challenges with this is if the leader is having this discussion with a manager who then has a team that needs to be executing this, it's almost like a case of that grapevine game where you say something, someone interprets it, and then they communicate it to someone else. And by the time the people who are actually executing it, their interpretation of what the leader actually said is so different. And so you're right. It's really important to have that mirror, that reflection of, well, what did I just say? And then use that as something to communicate. So very key strategy. Are there some other things that leaders can do to help make sure that their teams have very clear directives?
Well, one of the things is making sure that you have a culture where you have healthy debate, healthy conflict, and have a set of agreements about the way that you run meetings. Because what often happens is everyone's. I'm working with someone now that just was going with them. Like, everyone is aligned. Yay, we're doing all this work, and then everyone's nice to each other, right? And so everyone says, yes, that's a great idea, that's a great idea. So they have your kind of regular weekly meetings, or whatever. and somebody has this wonderful idea, and before you know it, like, okay, I guess we're doing that. I guess we're doing that. And then, by the way, it's not like who's going to own this, and then what are we gonna say no to in order to say yes to this now new thing. And so I would just make sure that you have a culture where people can have real debate, that you've really clarified what the overall strategy was and what the priorities are for that year. And so if they read a great article, then to me it's like, not just if you want to come to the table with, hey, I think this would be a great idea for us to do, say, like you said, okay, fine, tell me more, tell me why, and then say, okay, and what do you want to take off the, what do you think is worthy of replacing, of everything that we're doing now to put this in place?
I
And they
think
might
that's
say,
yeah,
oh,
that's really
well,
important.
nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Right, yeah. Though, and you're right, and that's actually a responsibility not so much just of the leader. I mean, sometimes leaders aren't aware that they're just piling it on, because they're so driven that they just presume that, like, everybody else can do the exact same level of output. And so it's also incumbent upon the team to say, give a little bit of pushback, and the easiest way to do it is to say, where do we reprioritize what's already on the list? Where does this one fit into the new prioritization? And I've actually seen leaders who just keep adding stuff, and it's like you're reading a document where everything is bold. And when you
Right.
bold everything, nothing is bold. And so that's one of the risks of being in that type of environment. And you as a team member do need to push back a little bit. And you can do it in very polite ways.
Yeah, I love I just said earlier today, everything, if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. I love the bold analogy. I'll have to use that. Yeah, I mean, you could create structures, right? So, we do round robins to make sure that everyone's voice is heard. You could also say, like, if you have a new idea, then ask everyone to go around and say why they think it's a great idea, and then say, okay, now everybody has to go around and say why they think it's a lousy idea, and everybody has to have at least one reason why it's a lousy idea. In other words, make it the expectation, make pushing back the expectation. In the same way, going back to the original topic here around clarity around goals and objectives, you could go around and say, like, okay, what did what did you hear me saying? Like, okay, next person, like, make that even clearer and define even more. Okay, next person, right? And so have a game where the team actually helps you, the leader, and the rest of the team get really clear and specific, right? And so everyone has to make the objective even clearer and clearly defined and measurable and obtainable, and winnable.
Hmm. And so, what are some of the other challenges that people come across? It could be things like maybe some team members aren't quite picking up their part of what needs to be done, and that could be causing delays. What happens in a situation like that?
Yeah, well, sometimes it is the people stuff, right?
Hmm.
Right. And so I'll tell you what I see as a problem, and then I'll tell you what I see as the fix, right? So a lot of times what happens is, let's say, Jamie isn't doing Jamie's part, okay? And so then Bob complains that Jamie's not doing their part, not to Jamie, but to everybody else. So now you have a culture of, I guess we're going to talk behind people's back, right? Because everybody else is, I know, like, Jamie's really underperforming. Or the leader or the person goes to the leader, the manager, and says, Jamie's not doing the part. The manager says, well, did you talk to Jamie? Well, no. Okay, well, go to Jamie, tell Jamie what you need. Make a request. This is a phrase for the day. Make a request. Rather than saying stuck in judgment, like, make a request. So and give them feedback. Like, when you delay getting stuff back to me, it holds up the whole project. But so then I would say, if that's still not working, then great. Let's have all the adults in a room and let's have a conversation, mediated perhaps by the leader. What not to do is go around, talking about what everybody else is doing wrong without really trying to fix it. If you do have an underperformer, though, could we start with, Jamie, how are you doing? Like, who knows? Maybe there's something going on at home that's been pretty traumatic, right? And
Hmm.
so start with just checking with the person, make sure the person is okay, and then, like, call it out. Say, so, if it's is a new pattern, right? So the one of the things that I've noticed is X. What's going on? What needs to happen, Jamie, in order to get your productivity back to standard, so that the rest of the team, so that we can be a high performing team like we once were.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Are there any specific metrics that people should be watching? KPIs, metrics, things like that that they could monitor?
Well, it depends on the project, right? So give me an example of a project we can together come up with a KPI.
Well, let's say a simple project. A lot of people work on. Marketing teams need to put out X number of blogs by the end of the month, and they're behind.
So what's the KPI? So if you break that down into and the whole timeline, right? So I would go back and ask you, somebody who's done a lot of marketing, right? What, right? So you've got your end measure here, right? You've got what are we talking about? 3 months? What's your
Yeah,
timeline?
maybe we've got a list of a number of quantity of items that we want to put out inside one quarter. And so, to some degree, we're sort of answering the question is like, well, like how on track are we? If we're going to be putting out one blog post a week, does that mean we're going to be on track for 12 blog posts inside that quarter? What happens in between then? What are the delays that we need to fix up? So I suppose if we're behind by 2 weeks and something hasn't gotten posted, that's when you really need to understand, put a magnifying glass on what the process problems are, and use that to fix it. So,
Yeah, and the team theoretically should be the expert on their function, right? And so I see a lot of like top down, like pulling out of the air deadlines, right? That have no meaning. And then
yeah.
they're either unrealistic, and then there's a lot of pressure and frustration, right? And then
Hmm.
failure, or they're just grounded in nothing, right?
Yeah.
Right. And so then I would say, as a manager, like, let's work together. Help me think. When you tell me when can it be done, and then you either agree with that or not. But at least you have a starting point for a discussion. And then like what you help me. You tell me what you think the metric should be. You know, that's so. Where should we be in a month? Where should we be in 2 months? Right. And then they give it to you, and they say, okay, great. Like clean this up a little bit more, right? And go back and have a deeper discussion, right? Because the first pass is going to be messy, right? So come back, and then we're like, okay, now what's going to get in the way, right? And then okay, so like outside of the earth of an earthquake, we're going to do this, right?
Yeah.
And then make sure that you're rewarding them and championing them and acknowledging them along the way, not just checking them, but acknowledging them along the way, and then hold them accountable for when it's under the when if they're not
I used to know a an executive who would set these audacious goals. Now, Jim Collins writes about big, hairy, audacious
right,
goals, stretch
right.
goals. We want people to really stretch themselves to achieve them. But this particular executive's, the goals were just so high, so hard to achieve. The team would just be looking as like, where did that come from? I don't even know how we're going to get started. And that was actually a demotivator for everybody. And he's thinking to himself, no, I'm really trying to stretch the team so we can accomplish these great, wonderful things. But the team's then just kind of rolling their eyes. Now, how do you reconcile that? Because you, as a team member, don't want to go to the leader and say, you're kind of full of this, because, they're the ones writing your paycheck. But at the same time, the leader sort of needs to know. How do you have that conversation?
Right. So there's two. Well, all right. So that's two. I mean, we just ended with like basically how do you push back against the boss? I mean, the first thing I'll say too, though, around the big, hairy, audacious, the BHAGs, is it a BHAG that is wrapped around like an exciting vision that's maybe like a year out, where people were like, wow, like, this is
Mhm.
hard, but it's exciting, and then you're giving them the resources and you're championing that, and you truly are like, hiking a mountain, right? Like you
Mhm.
truly are leading the industry, right?
Yeah, I think giving
Um,
them the resources is kind of a key word there, oftentimes overlooked. Yes.
Well, correct, right? So now let's go back to where you ended, which is, so let's say you're not giving the resources, and I'm a team member, and you've just given me this goal that I can't see how we're going to do it, and now you're not giving me the people that I need, say, to get it done.
Hmm.
So what I tell people to do is like literally pull together um, your argument, four slide deck, so 4 slides, right? And so here's where we are. Here's with what we have. Here's what we can do in this timeline. Here's what you said we need to do. We can do it. Here's what we need to do to get to be successful. If we try to do it, here's some of the potential risks. If you, boss, are willing to accept, I mean, we are gonna, that we're already working 60 hours a week, that's fine. We'll work 70, even though, we talk in this company about work-life balance, and that some of us have some young families. That said, we're willing to do what we can, but if you're willing to take the risk of recognizing that as a result, some of these other balls might get dropped, and then we might lose sight of this other project going on, or if you want to, recalibrate the whole thing, and then here's what we would need in order to make this happen. So it's not saying no, it's just saying, so here's the impact of that request. And we brainstormed ways that we think we could make it happen, but this is what we're going to need in order to do that.
I like that, because that approach looks like you're actually trying to come up with a solution. You're not saying no. You're sort of pushing back. Well, you are pushing back, but you're not doing an in-your-face pushing back. And you're giving the CEO or the executive options with a realistic understanding of what they should probably expect out of it. So that's a really nice, polite, delicate way. And my side note to that would be, is if you get a boss that basically says, I don't care, you need to make this happen, then you really are in a toxic work environment and you need to rethink whether this is the right environment for you, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it's weird because it creates a culture of competition and fear, and what we know about people are afraid, right? Leadership by fear. People tend to lack being innovative or creative. Decision making is tilted. Yeah, I agree. Now, I've also seen people be able to effectively, over time, find ways to communicate with that type of leader and tell them what they don't want to hear. But in order to do that, you've had to develop some equity, some credibility, and trust with that leader.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And so it all depends on that relationship that you've built. And to some degree, you might be able to do that sooner than later, but it all depends on that level of respect that each of you have for each other. Jeff, thank you very much. Insightful conversation about how you can set clear objectives and actually get this stuff done. We'll see you next time.
See ya. Thanks, Raj.